Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining me from upper state New York, right? That's where you are now? Tell me.
Upper Manhattan, yep.
Upper Manhattan is Kuan-lin Huang. And he is the author of a brand new book. Well, I say brand new book, Solve It Yourself, How to Fix the World's Problems with Science. And you're going to find out when I give the intro that he has a lot of science background. And he's been working with Mount Sinai. He is the developer of something called openboxscience.org as well. I'm going to tell our listeners a little bit about you. Born and raised in Taiwan, Kuan Huang serves as assistant professor of genetics and genomic science. And how do you say it? It's Icahn School of Medicine. Is that correct?
Yep, Icahn School of Medicine at Mount
At
Sinai.
Mount Sinai, New York. He earned his BA with honors in studio art and an honors in molecular biology at Wesleyan University, and subsequently obtained a PhD from Washington University in St. Louis, my old stomping grounds. I used to live there a long time ago. At Mount Sinai, Kuan leads the computational omics lab, is that right?
Yeah.
That's dedicated to solving pressing challenges in human diseases and published extensively in top-tier scientific journals. He's also the founder and chief unboxer of openboxscience.org, which you can go to that at openboxscience.org, a platform that organizes open scientific seminars connecting science around the world, and obviously has a passion because he wants individuals to start solving the world's biggest problems. Kuan has spoken at dozens of universities, companies, conferences about biomedical research and the STEM PhD career path. I love his statement, a good day in his life typically involves people, books, dark chocolate, boba tea, hiking, surfing, and tennis, and a 20-minute nap. I think that it about rounds it up. That's perfect. If we could all get that in every day, that'd be great. The picture at his website shows him. Where are you? Where are those mountains there with the legs in the air?
Oh, that one is in Colorado.
Colorado. Well, it certainly is a gorgeous picture. And it looks like maybe you were doing a little bit of yoga or something. I'm not quite certain, but or you were running on those boulders over there. Now, this book starts off, and I think it's really important. People learned a little bit about you. They've learned a little bit about your passion. They need to understand the book is primarily a Kindle book for 99 cents, that all the proceeds go to the charity of our listeners' choice when they purchase the book. And there's a little form there you fill out when you do this. But you start off the book with a story about Stuart Brand in 1968. You state that this story and what he developed, which was the Whole Earth catalog, popularized the do-it-yourself philosophy. Can you tell the story and why it's so important to the SIY, Solve It Yourself book that you've just written, and are asking people to dive in with their passions and their purpose and their responsibility and help change the world in big ways?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation, and it's really an honor to be on your podcast. I think it's going to 1,000 pretty soon, and that's a really, remarkable, admirable effort.
15 years. 15 years.
15 years. That longevity, I need to learn a lot from you. I'll poke your brain about that later.
Okay.
Yeah, and as you said that, the solve it yourself is really one variation of the do-it-yourself philosophy, which Stuart Brand did not invent it, but he was the one that really helped pioneer a lot of concepts and help broaden the scope, and also through publishing Whole Earth catalog really helped spread the message. And many of you probably know it better than me because you're probably, living in this country in that time and know more about it. But, he basically come up with a lot of really ingenious ideas. He like asked people why we haven't seen a picture of the Earth when people are going to space. And then he sell buttons for it for 25 cents. And then that helped NASA to decide, oh, maybe we should take a picture of the Earth. And people really start seeing the Earth as this beautiful globe from the space. And that really helps inspiring people the idea of why we should take care of the planet. This is one of the most beautiful planet we can see from space, and it's the only one we have.
There's another guy too. You didn't mention him in your book, but I actually wrote a segment in a book that was done about him, and it was Buckminster Fuller, and he used to talk about spaceship Earth. And this is in a time back, actually in the same time as Stuart Brand. And if you don't know much about Buckminster Fuller, many of my listeners do. Geodesic dome was one of his inventions. Diametron car. It was really a fascinating man. And I think what you're doing is the DIY. We see a lot of do-it-yourself. Look, everybody can go to Google and Google a video on how to do something themselves. The spirit of that DIY lives on. Every day it lives on. And today, to resolve the day-to-day affairs, right? We're talking about just easy stuff. But rarely have we taken this, as you said in the book, mentally more seriously and apply it to the world's problems. If you would speak about the SIY framework to assist us in solving more of the social problems, and in your book, you outline everything from climate change to diseases. You speak about the pandemic, things that we've solved actually. Well, I don't know if we've solved it, but pretty quickly we've at least gotten a vaccine faster than any other vaccine that's come out. So speak with our audience, because this is, in one sense, this book is great, and it's asking people to look at these issues. In another sense, it takes a ton of discipline to do it. And I'm not certain everybody has a discipline, so I'd love to see them have the disciplines you have.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm a man of discipline too, but that's the reason why we have systems and to push ourselves on this path of making it easier and really help us achieve the goal. And as you say, we do DIY to assemble furniture, but why don't we do it for climate change, for social media addiction? And the 4 simple steps in this SIY Solve It Yourself framework is really going from identifying the root cause. So obviously with any problem like the pandemic, like climate change, like social media abuse, we want to know why it really happens. And after that, we want to kind of switch our mindset. Instead of blaming other people, that, like no single person deliberately caused climate change, probably. Not a single person deliberately caused the whole social media fake news things we have. But each of us probably have a minor part to take in it. And even if we don't, the Earth really is our biggest legacy. So why don't we own up our responsibility and shifting our mindset from blaming others to taking a look at what we can actually do ourselves. And the next step is to take proven action. And this is a part where I borrow a lot from my science backgrounds. I don't personally do like all the research in the world, but obviously to solve a single problem, like to solve a pandemic or to solve the climate change, there's different ways that people propose to solve the problem, but the different solutions have different level of evidence. And normally we want to look at evidence to see what actually works and what is the most effective out of the thing we can each individually do. And lastly, after you have done all these, I think it's important for us to each enlarge our impact. I think you can, once you make the action a habit, it becomes fairly simple for everyone to do, but in the process, and I give many examples that you might actually move a lot of people around you. People see that you are bringing containers to stores to reduce plastic use. Obviously, in non-pandemic time, your friends might start follow suit. People see that you walk to work instead of driving a 5-minute distance every day. They might follow suit that kind of thing, that
Mhm.
it will really enlarge your impact and then eventually help us achieve the overall goal of solving these really seemingly complex social problem that seems to be exclusive to the government and big corporations, but really each of us have a role to play.
Well, I really appreciate the stories that evolve from individuals, young people, old people alike, but primarily more young people, especially the guys right now that have formed a big nonprofit that's cleaning the plastic out of the ocean. And the kind of products they've made from the plastic that they've actually pulled from the ocean, including face masks, which I thought was kind of fascinating. You really look at a problem like that, which, the garbage patch in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is a monumental problem. And these guys are going at it and they're tackling it one day at a time. And I kudos to them. And that is something that started from two surfer guys on the beach, right? Picking up plastic. And I think it can be that simple, but it also can be a lot more complicated. Um, you know, you spoke about the coronavirus at length and using it as an example of how to drill down to the root cause of asking the simple question of why. You just mentioned why. Speak with us about addressing these kinds of problems with the Simon Sinek why question. Simon's been on the show. He probably has more hits on his podcast than anybody else. But the reality is that the why is the big question. Um, and what is it in your estimation as a scientist, as a researcher, as somebody who's looking at genomics, who's looking at how to solve some of our challenges with diseases, right? Why is the why so important?
Yeah, Greg, thanks for mentioning this. And why I think it's one of the greatest gifts we all have to really dive into our own curiosity, but also really dive into the cause of any problems we may have. Simon, obviously a great writer and philosopher, has this book Start With Why, and he really want people to dive into their purpose and organization's purpose before they address the how of they do it and what they do. And I think in our particular case of Solve It Yourself, the why is really helping us get to the root of the problem. And Greg, as you mentioned, we talked about the coronavirus pandemic in the book, and I think asking why help us to go from emotional response to a potential pandemic. I think especially in the spring of 2020, that a lot of us in New York, I'm sure many other places, really felt this emerging threat that just caused so much anxiety and we didn't know what to do about it. I don't know if you remember last year when it was unclear how this is all spreading and suddenly affecting all the people in New York. Our hospital had to set up a field tent in Central Park, and people are just consumed by this emotion. But in the meantime, I think it helps to dive into the scientific self and maybe start doing a little bit of rationalization and your curiosity. So maybe ask, okay, why are the cases really going up so high in New York? Well, must be like every person who's infected is infecting more than one person so that the case will grow like an exponential curve. And why would that be? Well, it seems like most of these cases, when people dive into it, come from a lot of these indoor super spreading events. And then they really keep asking why to realize, okay, it's likely an airborne virus. A lot of these involve people like talking, singing to each other in an indoor space. And then, once you dive in enough, you realize that, okay, so there are obviously complex solutions that us as scientists need to develop in the long run, like a vaccine. But in the short term, maybe we can all each take simple steps like, okay, maybe we start wearing masks. And yeah, see, once we start wearing masks, a lot of the transmissions that happen are much, much less. And I think even in the early reports back then where we didn't know as much, but because people are asking why, they realized that even in the hospital environment, when people are wearing all these protective gears, they really have a reduced case count. And that's why it's important that, before you freak out about all these problems, like, all these things seem so big, right? Climate change, social media addiction, cancer, Alzheimer's disease. But if you keep diving down into why, you eventually identify the tractable causes, and then you can focus on the action you can take. And so that's why it's so critical that we keep asking ourselves why, and asking multiple whys in a row is particularly helpful.
Well, it's kind of deductive reasoning. I think when people go to innovate, it's divergent thinking. Innovation sometimes requires a disruption. As you know, as a scientist, I think you wrote in the book that a guy was eating poop to get rid of his cancer. Not something that, I would think about doing. It wasn't his own poop. It was the poop of a goat or something.
A
Um,
llama, that was
a
just a
llama.
co-example.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that part. It was interesting. Now, in your section of the book called Mindset, Own Your Responsibility, uh, you you mentioned, um, I hope I get his name right. Is it Yafat Seskine, the executive director of a non-profit called Madre, and it means mother. In uncertain times, think like a mother, is what he said. Own your responsibility like a caring parent would. What does it take to have the passion to own responsibility? Because you mentioned about, we had the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, and we should have had the Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. I actually think it was him that said that, or somebody. But the point is that, when you say the word responsibility, to me, I define it up in two sections: response and ability.
Mm.
It's our response and our ability. Now, I think a lot of people can respond. The question is, do they have the skill set and the ability to respond to whatever it is that they're trying to address? How would you help people get their hands around that and try and find solutions? Because this is about solve it yourself.
Yeah, Greg, and I think it's so clever that you separated to response and ability. And a lot of the time, it seems like, you gotta have a lot of power to be able to solve things, right? And, here I like to make another quote to the Spider-Man movie, sorry, where instead of saying, with great responsibility comes great power, with great power comes great responsibility, you can flip it around and say, with great responsibility comes great power. And this is a quote, I think, spin around by Mark, who's the author of How to Unfuck Yourself or something like that.
Yeah.
Sorry for misquoting the book. But if you think about it, you don't actually need to be a Superman before you solve the problem. If you own the responsibility, you can solve so many problems. I think you can see this I see this from a lot of examples. I'm not a parent myself yet, but I see this from examples, so many parents of my own and my friends who become parents. Like before they become parents, you're like, oh, that party guy, how can he ever raise his kid? But once that guy had a baby, he can do so many things.
Right.
And also something about this is that if we all see, for example, the earth as a legacy we have, like how our kids are the legacy we have as parents, then we wouldn't say that our kids' education is screwed up, but let's protest their government and wait for them to change the whole education system.
Right.
And not do anything about it in the meantime because we don't have power, right? Even if we don't have the best solutions, we probably try to do everything we can to read them the good books, to bring them to do sports, go to nature, all that kinds of stuff, before we demand the systematic change from someone who's more powerful, quote, because a lot of the times you really have the power once you assume the responsibility. So I think here, that's why it's really a mindset shift. Actually, owning this responsibility can seem challenging, but as you said, as the book has mentioned, that it can actually be very empowering and very relieving, that instead of seeing these as really cumbersome issues, once you have own the responsibility, actually it becomes very actionable and you feel like you have the power to address it.
I like how you address that, because I think for a lot of people listening, they might look at these overarching world issues like climate change and diseases and all kinds of things and droughts and things that we're trying to solve. to be monumental, yet it, as you said, it comes from taking the responsibility and then drawing the people and community around you to support you, including the scientists and other people, to make it happen. That doesn't mean that you can't be a leader in that area and still continue to drive forward the cause, because a lot of these are causes, but behind the cause have to be a lot of researchers and scientists and people that understand it, that sometimes the people driving the cause aren't those people, but they are the ones that are out there trying to make a difference and make a change. I look at in our own, and I'm trying to remember his name right now, Cesar Chavez. You know, Cesar Chavez was here in California leading the movement for equality for farm workers, right? Because farm workers were treated so bad. And if it hadn't have been for that movement, the farming community and the people that work in that community may still be working under extremely adverse conditions. Not that the conditions still aren't adverse, but Cesar Chavez was certainly an example of somebody who stood up. We have many of those kind of people. So you say having a purpose is certainly important to being passionate about solving a big problem. That goes to my example of Cesar Chavez. He had a purpose. He had passion. How do you find your purpose and drive as a professor of genetics and genomics to solve big problems, you personally?
That's, oh, okay. So that's not about this book, but yeah, I think obviously I, like most people, are always in a search of purpose. And I think
Well,
something that,
it is about the book when it comes down to your purpose. I think it's important for listeners sometimes when they want to know the author, they want to know what drives them too. So I threw this question in there.
it's a great question. Every question that requires extra thinking. I think goes also into, I think solving a fulfilling career section of a book where I write about, a lot of the times we live the life of what others expect of us, but really we want to dig in and find what we are really here meant to do. And this is not a simple exercise. I still journal periodically and revise my vision all the time. But I think several time points could be helpful. And one thing is that if you remember back to the day, I don't know if Greg, you remember that when you were a child and people ask you, what do you want to be as a child? What do you say back then?
What did I say?
Yeah.
I actually think, if I remember correct, that I wanted to be an actor. I know that sounds kind of weird. I never became an actor, but I'm a podcaster.
Close enough. Actually, it's very related, right? Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that time point is really helpful because that's before, people tell you that, oh, you can't be the president or you can't be an astronaut because all these reality constraints. And at that time, also, when people ask you that, likely you are not thinking about all the social hierarchy we have, all the money you can have gained from, being a banker versus working in an NGO, that kind of stuff. And so that probably reflects your passion in a way that, your 25-year-old answer probably doesn't in some way, but maybe for some people it does. And so one thing that, I really enjoyed doing as a kid was, and I think one of my really formative teacher in high school assigned us this thing to tell us, write down your dream in 10 years of what you want to do and be as ambitious as you could without any constraint. At that time, I was really actively swimming. I swam 6 hours a day back then. And I wrote that I will swim in the Olympics and be a biology professor in 10 years, because also I really love going to nature with my family and uncover all these secrets of nature that, you can't just see with bare eyes without much thinking, that kind of stuff. And so I think, having constant visiting to your vision really helps because, now 10 years later, or now a little past 10 years later, I didn't make it to the Olympics, unfortunately, but at least one out of the two came true. And I really enjoy, diving into what nature really has encoded for us. I think solving mystery is a lot of fun. But at the same time, I am so lucky because I get to do this in the meantime while I think that I personally really enjoy being as healthy as I could, and I want to help other people. I personally been troubled by different disease at different time points, and I think it really helps if we can have better ways to prevent, diagnose, or even treat some of the diseases. So in doing that, I think I merged my interests in the curiosity of nature of biology with what we can do using big data to find better ways to predict and now diagnose and treat disease. And so now, I can really pursue this as a passion in my job. And, I have no problem working extra hours, etc., because it's just fun to do so.
It's what you love doing. I think it was Stephen Kotler, The Art of Impossible book. He said, you get focus for free, focus. You then have curiosity. Curiosity turns into passion. So there's a kind of a formula here. Passion, your three greatest passions, then turn into the purpose. The purpose then turns into the goals that you will set, both proximal goals and the goal setting. And then after the goal setting, when you're not achieving what you want, it's determination and grit that actually take you to the finish line. So when you look at a little bit of the formula and you look at the steps, I always tell my listeners, look, you get focus for free. Focus is there, but the reality is focus is probably one of the most important things to say, I'm going to take all the other distraction, put them aside, and put all my energy, because we only have so much energy to give to any one thing, right? And if you look at your wildly important goal, the way to do that, I had a great interview the other day with Jim Hewling about the 4 disciplines of execution. And, he used an analogy, Quan, of an air traffic controller with 23 planes trying to land. And he said, well, you know what? You may have in your mind 23 things you have to do today, but there's no way possible you're going to get all 23 done. So how are you going to pick the one plane that's going to land and you're going to make sure you get it done correctly, Craig? And I thought that's a really good analogy. It's a great analogy because everybody out there has lots of distractions of other things they can do that take them from their purpose, that take them from their passion, that take them from setting that goal. Because they now have given more importance to that. And I think that's probably one of the most important things. Now, you speak about choosing actions that are provided to address the root cause. And I think this is what I was just talking about is action. Can you give us an example of a problem that has been solved and the actions that needed to be taken to solve it? It could be in your personal life, or it could be the pandemic. About 2 months ago, I ordered Bill Gates's book on climate change. I haven't even finished that one yet. But the point is everybody out there could say, okay, I know what it is, but how do I take the action?
Yeah, and Greg, like you said, focus is very important in terms of choosing the right action to take first, because obviously with every problem, with climate change, I think pandemic is probably the easiest example because now we are solving it. I think climate change, there's still a lot of parameters. So, if we look at the pandemic as an example, there are different actions that are proposed at different times. And among all the possibilities, typically you want to focus the one with credibility. I think that's one of the hard challenge that we're facing now and will face more and more as mankind, because now we have more and more things on social media. A lot of the things it's hard to validate whether it's true or not. And now there's even better methods using machine learning and AI to generate different levels.
Very fast opportunity to change. Speak with our listeners, because you're in genomics and biochemistry. And, Moderna worked with some people in Germany, and I heard some of the stories, and they used a new delivery method with the Moderna vaccine that J&J did not use. I don't know if you know this or not, but I would think somebody in your field of science would. What made that delivery system so unique, and what are the positives? Because when you think about it, they did this in less than a year. It was the way in which we, I guess, the vaccine gets into our system.
Yeah, I think the vaccine paradigm is entirely different, and I think this comes to choosing the action. They have chosen a smarter action, although this spans the history of decades, and I think it was hard to predict because I think both in Germany, I think it was a husband and wife team, and also
Right.
in Penn State, which is also a professor scientist who had just been reluctantly working on this mRNA vaccine technology for decades when people didn't necessarily think that it would be a great solution, because at that time the technology is still immature, and actually the US scientists has a hard time obtaining the government funding at that time to do research. Luckily, the technology development continued to happen with their persistence. And the reason that it has worked so effectively and the vaccine design is much faster is that they're able to look into the nucleic acid and design the mRNA instead of generating the traditional antibody. And with that, they can just synthesize the mRNA sequence, which then get delivered into the body to produce the antigen, and your body triggers the immune response. I'm not an
Fascinating.
immunologist myself, so I do the part of figuring out the sequence and what the sequence mean. The immunologists actually deliver the vaccine, and then also once they have the mRNA, they put it in different vehicles of different kinds of molecules to be absorbed by the body. Traditional vaccines might use variations of other viruses to carry the encoded vaccine into the body, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think, but in the hindsight, it's easy that oh, of course, mRNA vaccine would have worked better, but 20 years ago, when that technology was still very immature, let's say if you're solving a pandemic 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like the first SARS, that solution was not ready. And
Yeah.
you can say that's a better action. But we know that, as scientists, normally we are not conflicted, and we will report it. And that's a great thing about scientists, because, in the papers we published, we don't, if we have a company that's associated with profit, then we'll have to disclose that, and that. We are not like just random tweeters down the internet that, I might actually be promoting my own product and say, oh, this
Right.
vaccine is great because
Right.
actually like
Right.
I would get 5% cut from,
Right.
So I
Right.
think if you look at scientific studies,
Self-serving. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. Well, you
yeah,
explained it really well, and I didn't want to diverge too much, but I do believe that that's a great example of how something happened. I also watched a recent PBS special that changed the longevity of human life by 20 years, which was penicillin. And it was interesting, the development of penicillin in London in the late 1800s. And then Pfizer took it on here to actually develop it in mass doses to be able to give it. When you look at one drug that really changed the trajectory of the human life expectancy, it obviously has been penicillin. And it's pretty, and they said the second drug was the drug for AIDS, because we were losing so many people to AIDS. So it's, to me, just a fascinating field, your science and where it is. Now, you speak about Fredo Pareto and the Pareto principle, the 80-20 principle. And I think most people know it, but it's that if you had anything, just take anything, that 20% produces 80% of your results, right? That's basically, so it's about focus, right? What and how does this, and how can it help us in solving big problems, this Pareto principle? Everybody's heard the Pareto principle. Not everybody probably knows exactly what it is, but you mentioned it in the book.
yeah. And so Pareto principle is also famously known as the 20-80 principle.
Yeah.
And it's really from Pareto, who's gardening, realized that 80% of his piece comes from 20% of the plants. So he could have just focused on caring for the 20% of the plants. And this really transforms also into taking social actions. I think a lot of people, for example, have written climate change books, but a lot of these has focused on social activism, and is not my expertise because these require lobbying to the government, big corporations. But let's say among the things we can individually do, what can reduce the carbon footprint the most, right? And that's the kind of thing that, this book is trying to investigate. Obviously there's all these things. We can turn off the light bulbs, we can make our fridge more energy efficient, we can walk to work, we can do all these things. But let's say if you're only disciplined enough to make one change to your lifestyle, what should that be to reduce the carbon footprint the most? And so with this, that's why it's really helpful to know some of the scientific studies. And obviously I'm not expert in this field, so this actually comes a lot from research by Sesquins and others, where they look at, for a typical, let's say, a citizen working in a Western civilization in the US or in North America, what would changing each action change the carbon footprint? And the top one obviously has to do with having one fewer baby, but that's controversial because also, your baby might also be the biggest problem solver. But the number two for a lot of us is commute.
Driving less.
Driving less.
Well, the pandemic forced that. I live in California and I don't live that far from Los Angeles. I live in north of San Diego. But I noticed the air quality change just because there wasn't any commuting, right? And I'm sure in New York too, you guys noticed the difference because of the lack of people commuting. And I kept telling people, well, if there's really one good thing that's coming from the pandemic, it's that we're cleaning up our air. And actually, then I heard some scientists actually talking about it globally, and it was fascinating. All the commuting worldwide that just stopped had a pretty significant effect on CO2 emissions.
You are definitely right. And there are cycles of these different social measures, how it affects it, and published in scientific studies.
Yeah.
But just as a reference, I think, and I'm definitely guilty of this, having a very international background. One international travel could easily change your yearly carbon footprint by 1 ton of CO2, which is much more than an average person, let's say in South Asia, produce each year. And I feel like we gotta feel some responsibility for that. And maybe in our future business travel, we maybe at least even consolidate 3 trips to 1 will help you save 2 people's carbon footprint in an entire year. And that's pretty tremendous compared to, let's say, if you're just trying to, turn off a light, although it helps, but then it's not the 80-20 that you want to focus on the most in change.
Well, we've seen an evolution in this country and Taiwan and all these countries from, you look back in history, maybe your parents, your grandparents, we were an agricultural society. We needed big agriculture to feed the people. Today now with chemicals, unfortunately, we can grow more plants quicker, feed more people. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying that that's a fact. That's what's going on. Then we moved to an industrial revolution, including Taiwan, including China. We saw pollution coming from this industrial revolution. Then we went from industrial revolution to, I say, called technology revolution. But I think we're on the verge of a new revolution. And that revolution to me is this merger of really the way that we're utilizing technology to solve these very complicated problems. And I do believe we're on the verge of solving some very monumental problems globally as well. Now, that's my own commentary, but you speak about writing this book and you were sharing your mission about writing the book. And I think the key is you sharing your missions with a Toastmaster group. And you asked them to raise their hands and how many people wanted to write a book. I've written 2 books myself, so I know this. And 40 hands went up. And then you asked how many people actually have completed writing a book, and there were only 4 hands left up. This is controversial, what you're talking about here, meaning validation from others. There are psychologists that don't believe you should do this. I'm a contrary to it. I believe that doing what you recommended is good. So why do you believe the validation from others is such a good inspiration and motivation to keep you writing your book? Because these people afterwards kept emailing you saying, is your book done? Is your book done? Right?
And I think, yeah, it probably depends on your personality, but it definitely works well for me, and it seems like for you. And I think I heard in a Chinese speech once, people call this arresting yourself. So basically what I did was I go to Toastmaster and give this speech and said that, and this was just before a pandemic, I say, I'm working on this book and this is the topic. And then I asked, who has thought about writing a book, and then who has actually started writing the book, and then who has actually, obviously, like the hands just dramatically goes down. But once I say that, even if the people didn't email me, in the back of my head, I was like, oh shoot, next time I meet this so-and-so in that meeting, he's gonna ask Quan, like, where's your book at? Like, oh,
Yeah.
how's the progress on that? So you just kind of have that in the back of your mind. You gotta keep working on it. And I think this goes into account of a lot of habits you can build, right? If you're commit to, walking to work 3 days a week to reduce your carbon footprint, maybe you'll tell your friend that. And then in the office, then maybe, next week they see you like driving to the office 4 days a week, they'll be like, oh, Quan, what are you doing? I think you just told me that last week. So you have this kind of social pressure. And I think in a good way that we are all connected to this kind of interdependence. And, the solve it yourself philosophy is very independent. You can solve many problems. But a lot of times we can also leverage others to help us achieve our mission. And maybe at the same time, we also, build accountability for them. And you'll be like, you want to do it together? You're driving to work 4 days a week too. Why don't you walk with me? And let's see who walk more to work, that kind of thing. So I think it's really helpful to work.
I think if the day comes when we're using solar energy to power electric cars or whatever type of transportation, and the car is filled and it's autonomously being driven, taking people to wherever they're supposed to go, this is a future I can see, which is not too far off. And I think it's a good thing. And Quan, you tackle everything from climate change to reducing chronic disease burden in SYI. How can SYI become a tool for our listeners to take action on their own passion project? Now, I know you gave them a toolkit, you outlined the tools, but more importantly, when you finish this book, I had it on Kindle and I was reading it. What is it that can happen, and what are 3 takeaways that you would like to leave the audience with as far as the book, finding their passion and fulfilling their human potential, I would say, because this is really a book, you say in the book, it's a part personal growth. I'd say it's about human potential. It's about us discovering that human potential and the opportunity to spark it and then move with it. So those are 2 questions. One is, what are the tools for the listeners? And 2, what are 3 takeaways?
Yeah. And so in terms of the tools for a listener, I hope that the framework is universally helpful. I find it really helpful for me to solve a lot of my personal problems, to solve the problem I see as important in the world. And obviously it's great to have this big dream, but as you say, it's important to have these practical tips. So, in the book,
can they go to your website and download that framework? Is there a framework at the website that they can get, or do they need to buy? I mean, it's only 99 cents, so I'm not, like, hey, if you can't afford 99 cents, you got a problem. But if you go to the website, I didn't see the framework outlined at the website, but it might be.
Yeah, it's not currently. I think the best thing is if you can support the cost and buy it for 99 cents,
Okay.
or revisit this podcast because we talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I think if they listen to it again, that would be helpful too.
Well, actually, just reiterate, because we're at the end of the podcast. What is the framework again? Just say it. Give us the steps.
So the 4 steps are identifying the root cause, and that's a cost. And then it's a mindset, which is own your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's action. Number 3, take proven actions. Number 4 is together you can 10x your impact. And in the book, in the physical book, there's also this section where people can identify their own passion and list out what they want to build as habit to solve what problem they are passionate about. I think the 3 biggest takeaway from the book, as you say, number 1, Greg, is really to identify your purpose and really tying that together with the problem that's the biggest challenge for yourself, for the people around you that you care about, and for the society. Number 1 really is your purpose. Number 2 is really to shift your mindset of, blaming everyone else, and think about, how do I own this as a responsibility? Because once I own this as a responsibility, I can change my life. I can change the life of people around me, and I can make the world better. So once you have that responsibility, actually you own the power after you own the responsibility. And number three is the simple thing. Once you have the mission, once you own the responsibility, you'll figure it out. But there's a lot of practical steps of finding out what's the actual proven action that give you the highest leverage according to the Pareto rule. A lot of the scientific studies, us scientists kind of, I think as a profession, do work for you to be able to do it. And then eventually you will be able to take these actions and start taking actions and influencing the world in a way that you want to see. And so I think that's it. Really going from purpose,
I think that's a
mindset,
great summary of the book, Quan, and I think that for our listeners, again, you're going to go to KUANLINHUANG.com, and I'm going to repeat that one more time. That's KUANLINHUANG.com to learn more about the book, Solve It Yourself, to learn more about openboxscience.org, to learn more about Quan himself. I think all of it there is an opportunity for you to learn. And I think that's the most important thing. If you take one thing away from this podcast, it's that you learned something about yourself. You learned something you can apply to yourself, and something you can move forward with, a cause that's important to you to take an action on. I'll use a simple example. For months now, I've been talking about I did a podcast with a guy out of London who wrote a book, not the Green New Deal, but it was a different book. I did one on the Green New Deal too. But his was about the challenges. Now get this, and he was like a specialist in this area of organic of the waste, meaning banana peels and avocado peels and all the things that people don't recycle, right? They basically put it down the trash, they put it in their trash can. And I did this like 4 months ago, and I was thinking, why doesn't our refuge system here locally have that? And lo and behold, about a week ago, a box comes at the front door saying, we want you to recycle all of your banana peels and your organic waste through here. And all you have to do is put it into the waste bin with the yard waste, because we're going to compost it all. We're going to compost all of that. And I was just, you look at it, it's one small little step, but one huge problem solved. Because if you really knew the problem we have with food waste, you would really look at that and go, wow. I mean, the podcast was just phenomenal. And actually the leading country is Italy in food waste. They led the charge in reducing food waste. So look, it really didn't take much. Somebody probably contacted I'm going to use this as an example, my refuge company. And over time, they got enough calls that people said, how come we can't compost all the stuff we're throwing away into the trash can? And lo and behold, there's a little plastic thing that comes at the door. It says, put it all in here. That's a pretty interesting example, right?
That's a remarkable story. It's great to be composting, Greg.
Yeah. Are you composting?
So in Taiwan, everyone in Taiwan compost.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I haven't figured out in a way in New York City to do it yet, but hopefully that will manifest in New York City
Well,
too.
I will tell you, if you have a waste disposal system that divides it, you can buy little bags on Amazon that you put that in, and they're all they're 100% biodegradable. So just start putting it in the bags and then putting it in your green waste. See what happens.
Yeah. Thanks for telling me that.
Yeah. See, that's like walking to work. Who knows what we did. So thank you so much for being on, Quan, and spending some time with our listeners. The book is Solve It Yourself. And it's like how you can fix the world's problems with science. It's been a pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon and enjoy.
Thank you, Greg.